Angus, always good to have you on the program. First up, the stage 3 tax cuts. A lot said about what the coalition will do with the government's revamped idea. Will you support them or not?
Well, Ross, good to be with you, and thanks for having me. Look, as I've said many times, we're working our way through this. It's clear from what we've heard today that Labor's been working on this for many months, and Treasury, in fact, potentially for many, many months, on how they would break this promise. And so we'll take our time to get to the right outcome here for the Australian people. But as always, we support simpler, lower, fairer taxes. We're the ones who actually put this legislation in place. I should say, with the support of the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, and 100 times, more than 100 times between them, they committed to these tax cuts. Indeed, they committed to continuing on with them even after they were doing work on how to get rid of them, which is, you know, what you would expect from a Treasurer and Prime Minister whose word is worth absolutely nothing, which is incredibly disappointing for the Australian people. I mean, in my time in politics, Ross, I have to say, this is the most egregious breach of trust that I've seen.
OK, so this comes down to pure mathematics, political mathematics, if you like. And certainly with by-elections coming up, you've got a situation where it really does count. 11 million people in Australia get a bigger tax cut. 1 million people in Australia get half the tax cut they were previously promised, and they're the people who are better off. Political economics, political mathematics says you've got to support that.
Well, can I just say that that's Labor's analysis, and let me tell you why that analysis is wrong and misleading. The first point is every Australian has been impacted by this government's failed economic management. The average Australian, this is a stunning number, the average Australian has seen their real disposable income fall by around $8,000 in the last 18 months, Ross. This is completely unprecedented. This is failed economic management, if there ever was failed economic management, and by a long, long way. That's 8.6% reduction in disposable incomes. Now, that failed economic management means that Labor is having to do desperate things, break promises that they've made over 100 times, breach the trust of the Australian people. And that's why they are going down this path. The truth of it is that for any Australian family who's been hit with that kind of reduction of disposable income, and for those with a mortgage, it's a much bigger number, this won't even touch the sides. And that's the situation we're in. Now, meanwhile, they're ditching one of the few very, very positive examples of tax reform we've seen for a long time in this country. Tax reform that will encourage aspiration, will drive people and give rewards to people to invest, to take risks, to build their careers, to build their businesses. And Labor's decided they don't care about any of that. Managing the economy doesn't matter to them, but the Australian people are paying a high price for that. So we will continue to prosecute the case on how Labor should be managing the economy. And meanwhile, we'll come to a sensible decision on how to deal with Labor's failure as they put the legislation through the Parliament.
So, Angus, I get you on what you say here about the failed promise. I get what you say about aspiration and wanting people to really have, a better aspirational tax system. I even get what you say about a simpler tax system. But the one thing I don't get is whether you, as a party, have the ability to communicate that to the public to be able to convince them that really politically it's the right thing to do and not the expedient thing to do.
Well, I think every Australian understands now what failed economic management looks like. They see it around the kitchen table, Ross. And this is why we are seeing such unhappiness from Australians right now with the situation, because they're being absolutely smashed. I mean, and that is a complete failure of this government. It's a failure on industrial relations. It's a failure on competition policy. It's a failure on aligning immigration policy with housing supply. It's a failure on tax policy, which we've just been talking about, of course. So in area after area, this government has completely failed to deliver the strong economic management, which in turn delivers a low inflation, strong growing economy, which Australians need and deserve, and it's not what they're seeing. So that's what we stand for. We'll work through this legislation. We've only learned about Labor's broken promise in the very recent past, years and years after this commitment was taken to 2 elections, not just one, Ross. And it seems some time after the government started working on how it was going to betray the Australian people. Can I add this, though? The other point here is that aspiration matters to Australians. It is central to what our country is. And when you say you're no longer interested in aspiration, and this is the party that took the top marginal tax rate, the Labor Party, down from 60% to 47% in the 1980s. This is the party that has absolutely given up on aspiration. I mean, what Paul Keating and Bob Hawke did now seems to be completely irrelevant to them. They are playing zero-sum politics and zero-sum economics, and the only people that will ultimately pay the price for that are the Australian public, and they are paying a very high price.
All right, one thing that you did agree with the government on was the reforms to the Reserve Bank, which under this new regime starts to make its decisions from tomorrow. Are you ultimately pleased with the outcome? And again, go back to the matter of communication. Are you satisfied that the Reserve Bank will have the communication skills to not confuse the public about interest rate policy?
Well, it is important that they give very clear guidance, that their communication be strong, and we're going to hear from Michelle Bullock tomorrow. I'm sure she'll do a good job, and it's very important she give as much clarity, at least of the framework they're using and how they're thinking about interest rates to all investors, to borrowers, and to everyone else who's so reliant on the Reserve Bank. I should say we are concerned about one aspect of the Reserve Bank review, the response to it, which is what Jim Chalmers is proposing on the Reserve Bank board, and in particular, he's proposing legislation right now which would allow him to replace all the members of the current board and put all his own mates on the Reserve Bank Monetary Policy Committee, and we think that is a very dangerous path to be going down, and we've made that very clear to him.
And just very quickly, one last thing. Interest rate cuts this year welcome by the Australian public if they do come.
Well, sadly, we've got an economy that has almost stopped. It's shuddering to a halt. It's stopped. It's negative in terms of GDP per capita. So it may well be that we're going to need remedial action. But of course, we do want to see lower interest rates, but we're not going to see a reversal of the 12 interest rate increases we've seen under Labor. Yes. The hits to disposable incomes that have already occurred, they're not going to be reversed. And that is a really serious problem for the Australian people.
And I've got to leave it there. Angus Taylor, always good to chat to you. Many thanks for your time today.